Thank you, thank you. Just want to thank everyone from Rappler to invite me to come. It's a pleasure to be in this beautiful nation. And for y'all to stick around. I think looking at this crowd, there's a lot of young people here, and you really should listen quite intently to what you just saw there. The future, with what we've heard today so far with climate change, and what I'm going to talk about a little bit points to the fact that for those of you that are young, that are getting going in your careers, for those of you that want to do civic engagement and want to be part of your community's recovery, for those of you that want to see a better nation building and find the Philippines to be more resilient to future actions, it's a long-term process. It isn't going to be done in a year, and it's going to happen over and over again. So this is an amazing tragedy, unparalleled. But it also creates what you've heard today and you're starting to see, which is opportunity. It's a chance to not only remember and never forget what has happened, but to make things better and hopefully make these areas more resilient from climate change. So why can I think that I know anything about that? I don't know why you might know that. So let me just give you a quick rundown of why I believe I can give you some insight on that and to where we're going in the future. How many of you know what Hurricane Katrina was? Most of you. How many of you know where New Orleans, Louisiana is? Good, that's great. I started off in this adventure of doing disaster recovery, coming from a world where you've heard the word bottom up, or community engagement. That's where I started. Hurricane Katrina and the place where Katrina happened in many ways is very similar to the Philippines. You saw Anderson Cooper on TV during the Katrina era, and he said, the pictures were all from New Orleans, you were in one spot. But Katrina was the largest and most deadly disaster in United States history. It spread from Houston, Texas, all the way into Florida. I'm aware that basketball is a very big sport here, so Houston Rockets all the way to Orlando. That's how big Katrina was. How much did Katrina cost? Katrina, our anniversary from Katrina was in August. Our cost at this point in time was $120 billion, and based on today's pesos, that would end up being $5.3 trillion. Over 1 million people in the United States, in the Gulf Coast, were directly impacted by Katrina. 273,000 people had to go to the housing shelters, like many of you know from the last year. They had to leave their homes. We had to move them inshore. We had to find places for them. Out of those 273,000, 114,000 persons had to live in shelters very similar to the bunkhouses and the things that you folks are going through now. I can only imagine how challenging this is, because after Katrina, I worked on the BP oil spill. The BP oil spills tied to Katrina, and the reason it's close to the Philippines, is that while you saw New Orleans, most of the Gulf Coast is comprised of fishing communities. It is agricultural. We have a lot of wetlands. We lose a football field of land a day in the Gulf of Mexico to climate change. So 2 years after the Katrina and we were starting to recover, we had a big oil spill, the biggest in the United States history, just as we were starting to rebuild our houses and getting things going. So our economy, the people that needed to get back into their homes were finally starting to go back, and that happened. And then in November of last year, I was starting to work on Superstorm Sandy. Sandy impacted New York City and the area around New York. I was watching TV in November, getting going on this major disaster we had, and trying to help New York come back with some of the information I'd learned at Katrina. And I could not believe that the size of Yolanda was that much larger than Katrina, but it was. We immediately were starting to get information from people to figure out what we could do, were there ways we could help. We knew straight away that there was going to be an incredible need for not only coordinated event assistance from federal governments, but also from the NGOs that are here today. So what I'm going to talk about coming up here a little bit is what I think you're going to see down the road. But I want to make sure that remember that what I'm telling you is that this can go faster and better than it is. And I'm going to point to a few examples to why I can think that may happen to you based on what you heard today. First, this morning we started off a little conversation about EGOS. When Katrina happened in the United States, we are really a very developed nation. We didn't have the structures in place that you heard Rappler and others are implementing today. Top-down ideas from the government, bottom-up ideas from people. We had some of that as a thought process. You already have put it in place now. The other thing that's one of the most amazing changes that will significantly impact your recovery and how things are going, which is a focus of this operation and what we're talking about today, and we just heard about it, is the ability of social media and how much faster information flows around the world today. It was amazing to see after, in the last 4 years, what has happened with using Twitter and Facebook and social media networks to get information out so that you could find people when they were displaced. After Katrina in 2005, it took weeks for people to find people. We sent people to Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York. Everyone had to go somewhere because there wasn't a house. There wasn't the social media networks in place to find people. So one of the things that happened was that people got very frustrated very quickly because they couldn't get back home and they couldn't find their loved ones. Today, you guys can do that immediately. And for those of you that are active and engaged, like we just heard the folks from Microsoft and Facebook talk about, collaborative efforts will make future events from disaster recovery more important, but it's important that they're done in a way that helps the overall recovery effort. That there's a way to do that so that when it comes back in, the immediate goals are taken care of. We also heard today from World Vision, who was here presenting earlier today. And I think that one of my takeaway messages is going to be the same as them, which is it's not only about rebuilding better today, it's about coming up with a better plan for the future. And that's important from the standpoint not only of doing it right, but there's so much money involved. And with so much money being involved, I'm going to talk about short-term and long-term needs. Every day, from a policy perspective and a political perspective, you have to solve the immediate crisis of the day. But when you have this much money and you have a unique opportunity to do something one time, you don't want to waste those dollars. Now, I've learned there's some things that could be going better, but the vision that World Vision was talking about looking for a better tomorrow and keeping hope alive. The challenge is that you're coming up on a 1-year anniversary. In Katrina, it took us over 6 years to get back, and that's in the United States. Sandy, we are coming up on the 2nd-year anniversary, and we're beginning to go into full-blown recovery mode. The BP oil spill, which impacted the fishing communities and the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico, we anticipate that to take 15 to 20 years. So this is going to be a long process. It's going to be a long process that then goes to the second thing that I heard that was really important. The commissioner that was here speaking earlier today, from climate change earlier, the nation, the Philippines, is taking very brave actions to put in place these climate change goals. And very specifically, the idea that you're using GIS technology and that you're turning around and you're going to make like no-build zones and that you're going to be trying to find ways to build buildings back better means that it may be slow and very complicated right now and frustrating, but over the long haul, you'll find that when these next disasters come in, they will be less likely to happen to you again and again. And so the dollars that are being invested today will end up being beneficial to you. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about try to give you a little bit of an insight into what my role was. I started off as a research analyst. I ended up being a policy director, which meant that I was in charge of programming dollars. I worked collaboratively within the context. I worked with the United States federal government all the way through the White House, down through what the provincial governments are in Thailand, and we worked with local and municipal governments. And my job was to coordinate that recovery and figure out how to put in the different dollars into the right areas and sequence them so that we could get them going. We largely did that by focusing on 3 areas that you guys are now also wrestling with: housing, infrastructure, and small business and economic development. One of the things, the ways we do that though, is that there's largely 4 things of policymakers in the way the process works. At every single point of the day, and you heard earlier today, there's different stages in the disaster recovery effort, and we're gonna talk through those really quickly about what they are, but also what it means for you. The second thing is very complicated. It's aligning your recovery goals. What do you need to do today in the short term? What do you need to do in the next 6 months? Versus where do you want to be down the road? What is your vision? What's your goal? What's your ambitions and your dreams? Not only for the nation, but what for the impacted areas. The third one, which I believe, again, the Philippines and you guys are doing ahead of pace, is that you're starting to have the relationship between the implementing agencies and the oversight and the transparency roles is exceptionally important. You have to have a good relationship between them. I understand some of that isn't going great, but it's incredibly important. We'll talk through it. The third one, which is something that is important for those of you that are bloggers, for those of you that are NGOs or on the what I refer to sometimes as being on the outside of the process, is remember to always try to understand the funding source. People say, we've got $1 billion. You should be able to do what you want. And while people donate money and NGOs come in to do work, and there was a number of federal agents, national governments that provided funds, they usually come with rules. It's not just a blank check. And what that means is everyone needs to kind of know the rules of the road so that when you're asking the questions and you're trying to figure out what's going on, if you know what the money can be used for, it helps you to ask the right questions and it helps you to put the right insight into what needs to be done. The final ones are the community engagement process and citizen interaction, which has been very helpful to us. I'll talk through that. And then media and oversight. So there's largely 4 stages of recovery. The post-storm emergency response is the stuff that happens right after the storm. About 75% of what we have after catastrophic disasters takes place in this first phase. It's how do you protect people, how do you clean up the debris, how do you find food, shelter, all that. That's the immediate stuff that takes place. That largely, for large events, even in developed nations, in particular, I'm speaking of the United States, after Katrina, that took us 6 months. It takes a long time. You can immediately find out the problems that are going on, but getting through that phase is one. The second part, which you're still largely in a response mode, is you've got to stabilize housing. There's nothing more important than finding a place for somebody to be, and they're going to have to be there either a long or short time, but you've got to stabilize the housing situation. People have to know that they've got a tent, they have to have a temporary home, they've got to be relocated. The third stage, which is I think one of the things that I'd like to stress here, is it's incredibly important that you begin a dialogue about what you want to have the long-term plan be. It shouldn't just be selected on its own, but it needs to be bottom-up and driven by not only the people that are the most impacted, but have engagement from all levels of government so that when the plan is developed, everyone knows how we're going to succeed. How are we going to win this game? Finally, you move into the rebuilding and resiliency phases. The picture up here on the left, that's Tacloban. The picture right in the center frame right here, that's downtown New Orleans, Louisiana, a city with, we lost 114,000 houses overnight. We went from having downtown full development to having that, everything washed away. The picture on the right, which looks like a bunch of white square boxes, and while I guarantee you that there are thousands of people in the Philippines that would welcome this, this is what 114,000 people in Louisiana had to live in for a year and a half. While you're standing up right now, you're working through the bunk camps and the tents and getting your housing stabilized. That's what we were able to use through our federal government because we're richer and we have more resources. It didn't happen overnight. Our press accounts were constantly of people that were unhappy with the housing situation. I think this is going to sound familiar. They wanted to go back to their homes. They wanted to go back to their school that existed. They didn't like living in cramped quarters so close together. But you needed to do something to stabilize that housing. The third thing that happens after you stabilize the housing programs is you start to rebuild your houses. Now what you'll see that's here, if you haven't been to the States, that's different, is those houses are being built higher. So what we did after our planning process was going on is we told people they had to raise their houses. And they were not happy about that initially. But similar to the Philippines, we have storms every year. We have hurricanes every other year. And we had one that happened 2 years after Katrina, right before BP, and all the houses that were built higher didn't flood. The third picture I'm showing you is on the bottom because it's going to get into infrastructure. Does anybody here watch NFL American football? Does anybody know who the New Orleans Saints are? The pride and joy of all of us. So the Superdome, this building right here, is where all the big United States sporting events are. It's one of the most important sporting buildings in the United States. Before Hurricane Katrina, it was our center of refuge. If you had nowhere to go, you were supposed to go to the Dome. The Dome failed. Our hurricane was so bad that it damaged the Superdome to the point that it was unusable. What happened is, within 2 years, we worked in where I worked, and we put that together and rebuilt the Superdome so that it looks like that now. And it was this huge event. U2 came, Green Day came and played, everyone came, people were crying. It was awesome, and the Saints won. So the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is really important for you guys to work through and try to remember, is that politics and the policy process here is largely driven by what I consider to be your immediate short-term needs versus your long-term desires. Disaster recovery, the analogy I always tell my team is every day you run a 100-yard dash, but you're running a marathon. And so every day you run 100 yards for 15 hours and you're going to do it for 4 years. It's really grueling, and so you've got to balance it out. So the difference that policymakers have in a different way is they have some responsibilities to the money. They have to balance that money, and they have the same needs. Policymakers are buying and out, want to take care of all their people. They feel the need of every single day they lost their house, they need to do things. But they have to try to balance both the short-term and those long-term responsibilities after identified. More importantly, they have to align the community needs with both the fiscal and the policy goals, what can be and that could be very complicated. They need to figure out what money they can get and how can they use it. When you have a disaster like this, those recovery funds are new, and they're not traditional. You don't know how to use them. They come with different rules. And that's particularly another thing that's true between our state, the Philippines and where I'm from in the Gulf of Mexico. You guys, this area, suffered major catastrophic events in the 1920s. So did we. It results in structural reform that will take place that will leave for every single one of you in your 20s and 30s. There will be changes that will take place, and you're going to be in your 50s, and you're going to remember that that change was made because of Yolanda. Those same things happened to us, but it's only after you get to the point that people try to figure out why things aren't working, and it's the uncertainty. The final thing is that policymakers, again, are needing to balance the individual needs of their community. They hear it every single day, but then they're also trying to figure out the long-term and short-term goals. This was an article that I saw in the paper, and I want to bring it up from the standpoint of saying that this was last week, and there was questions about the disbursement of the aid and that it was slow. This is something that happens frequently to us, but I'll say that there does appear to be some points in there that seem to be processed, that there does seem to be some disconnect. But what I'll say, though, is the transparency points that we're talking about in the future slides, I think are going to lead you to be more happy over the long term than where we were in the last beginning. So this is a slide just says to talk about the flexibility. Knowing your funding sources is really important that I've already covered a little bit. Questions to ask and things to know are, what are the program requirements? What do you need to do to get the money? People just don't give it away unless they just are donating. And this is one of the things that is the transparency. What is the use of funds? How long do you have to use the funds? One of the biggest challenges that happens is that, and we made this recommendation in the United States, and it's been implemented, is that the NGOs are the first folks on the ground because they have access to resources and they do that stuff. A lot of times what you really need is, we need those NGOs on the ground now. You need NGOs to be around for the next 1 to 2.5 years providing those same services. But a lot of times, whether you're an NGO or a not-for-profit or a federal government, you have to know how long the money's got to be spent because everyone's got to be responsible. The third thing is the reporting requirements. And that's going to turn into what I believe, this is again, Petra Taklaban, is the most significant thing that you can do to make sure from the outside that you're doing is actively working to have a community engagement process put in place. I'm exceptionally fortunate that I worked at a place that started with a community planning process that went across our entire state, was able to, we told communities that we needed them to tell their local leaders what they wanted. They had to bring that to us in a public way, and then we helped implement that in addition to the housing programs. That's really important to you. I'm now in New York, working in New York, and we've taken New York has taken that a step further by actually having the planning not be at the town level, but it comes from the town's committees. It comes from the people that are impacted. And then we go to the towns and we say, the people in your town want this. This is what we want you to implement. And what's really amazing about that in the last few years is it includes resiliency. It includes mitigation. It includes social network and the desire to find ways so that you can communicate better. Local officials wouldn't think that way. They would think about the need to fix the wastewater treatment plant or to build the school. But if you've got a good team behind you, we knew that going in. So this community engagement is exceptionally important. And again, while it may not be perfect, and I understand the frustration, I've sat and I used to take body blows every week in meetings. On paper and where you are today, you're ahead of this curve right now. So keep asking for it and stay on top of it, but you guys are starting that process now. The third thing, which is really important for the long term here, is you've got to try to find ways to be part of the equation by utilizing what I call transparency and developing long-term strategies to stay engaged. Anderson Cooper showed up, said there wasn't food after 4 days. What happens? People are around. You're going to come up on the anniversary on 1 year, everyone is going to remember. Everyone's going to say what happened. Then it's going to be another year, and you're going to have to start to build back houses, and you're still not going to have enough money, and so you need to find ways to keep people engaged. The ways you can do that is by working through with Rappler, stay involved, stay active, use Twitter, use Facebook, post on what's going well. Rely on your government, whether it's the local government, the provincial government, or the state government, requires some transparency. That actually works out to being in the long term in their best interest. The more that they're able to show you that they're using the money wisely, and most people that are that are doing disaster recovery work and that are trying to rebuild their communities really do desire that, the more it's out there, the easier it will be to achieve. So what I'd like to do is just close by saying with a couple of comments from what I've learned, and then I'll take any questions that you have. So I've asked around a lot of the speakers that were here today. I've asked the Rappler team. On paper, it looks like things look good. Not great, but what I'd say is that it sounds to me at this stage of your recovery that what you really need is a strong coordinating body. Again, in the United States, we tried, at the first year anniversary, we were making the same complaints. I was in a position where we were able to point to this in a very open way because we had dialogue at the state level, which is provincial. We were working with local governments who were frustrated, state governments were frustrated, and we were going to the federal government, to the White House, and we said, you've got to do something. And they put in place a federal coordinator, just like you have one here. But our first federal coordinator, didn't have any power. He had an ability to be the czar, but he couldn't really implement. He could simply talk through the problems that existed. And so we went back to President Bush and we said, this isn't working. All we're doing is we're having meetings. We're not getting the money down. There's still a bottleneck. I'm getting pressure from the local mayor because he can't build a school. So we had a second federal coordinator that came in. That federal coordinator had an ability to call somebody up and say, the state of Louisiana needs X resources, and it took 3 months, but it was better than 7 months. So when President Obama came in, we had a third federal coordinator, and that guy had the ability to not only negotiate and meet with us, but we could get things done in a meeting. He could walk out and say, that school's going to be fixed, and within a few days, the red tape and the bureaucracy was out. Now, I understand in politics is very complicated. It always is. It's exceptionally complicated in the Philippines. But the nice thing is that everyone should be pulling together, which is what we heard Ayala saying. It's talking about finding partnerships. But this coordinating body should have the ability to not only work vertically across the federal system, but they should be able to work up and down, going this way, so that they can bring information up and troubleshoot systems. Those persons that are on those bodies, where I work right now, everyone that I hire, that we work, those aren't career jobs. These aren't political jobs that you're going to have for 10 years. You're in for 5 years and you're done. That'll be it for today. If you have any questions, glad to help.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, guys, I think it's a great opportunity to ask about global experiences and how it can apply to us. Does anyone have any questions for Chris?
Questions?
Sorry, I thought I was done.